Now, because I service, I can't get to say the word service. Hi there, it's Tim from Auto Van Cam, and today I'm going to be showing you how to change the front brakes on your vehicle. First, we're going to start by getting the vehicle up on ramps, so we can then lift the vehicle up in the air. I like these Motomaster 2-piece wheel ramps, and they give a very long ramp with a high lift. So a very shallow gradient that comes up to a high lift. And I found these ramps to be the best ones that I've used so far. Remember, when you're lifting a vehicle on a slope or even on a flat surface, it's always a good idea to take, I use a piece of wood, to take a wheel chock and slide it underneath the back wheel. That way, when you're lifting the vehicle, nothing bad can happen. Wow! Hi everyone, we're now underneath the vehicle. We're going to lift this vehicle up now, and I'm going to show you how. I'm going to use a piece of board, a bit of wooden board, and that's to stop your shop jack damaging your driveway. So if you don't want those little divots, because the contact point of the shop jack is very small and you're lifting a heavy vehicle. So this helps evenly distribute the weight of the shop jack so you don't damage your driveway. Now, when you're underneath a vehicle, I always recommend some safety glasses. That way, if you have a rusty vehicle or an older vehicle, or even a new vehicle that's got some rust or grime underneath the vehicle, it stops that falling in your eyes, and that could be a bad day. Now, because I'm using 6-ton axle stands, I like to lift the vehicle nice and high. I also use a bit of 4x4 on top of the plate of my shop jack. So, let's get this shop jack underneath, eh? Now, the majority of vehicles have a subframe that runs along the middle. Your vehicle might be the exception. Some Hondas have it at the front so you can lift the front of the vehicle. A lot of vehicles have the subframe here behind the engine, and the subframe is a frame of the vehicle that is not attached to a unibody type vehicle like car. It is bolted to it, so it's not part of the unibody. And I'll stick my 4x4 there and get it nice and central to the subframe. Now, if your subframe's rotten, don't lift it from there. Find another place. But I always like to lift from the frame or the rear trailing arms. I don't like to lift with a shop jack on the seals if I can avoid it, because that way, if you're lifting at a 90-degree angle to the seam of the vehicle, you can actually damage your seam. So make sure your handle is nice and tight. Let's move this. There we go. So I use the piece of 4x4 to give some extra height whilst lifting, so I can get 6-ton axle stands underneath the vehicle. I use 6-ton axle stands because it gives you extra height. They are more stable because they have a bigger footprint on the floor. And I also use wood underneath those as well to stop any damage to a driveway. So let's lift this up. I am using my leg at the moment. I like to do that just to monitor how the vehicle is being lifted. And then I'm now going to zip out the vehicle and finish lifting this car up. As you can see, the vehicle is nice and high. Now I'm Here, as you can see, this is the pinch weld, the seam, the sill of the vehicle. This is its vertical jacking point, or using your spare wheel, so for your emergency kit, your scissor jack can also fit here as well. Let's slide that out the way. We've got another piece of wood here. Protect the driveway. I like these Sunex 6-ton axle stands. They're great for the job, and I'll tell you why, because it's hard to find 6-ton axle stands that have a foot to them. They're normally just a sharp edge. These ones have a foot, and that will stop the shop jack from digging into the wood, and it helps spread the weight more evenly. Now, if you're using 3-ton axle stands, they will quite often come with a foot. So you won't, if you're using 3-ton axle stands, don't worry. Let's turn this jack around. There. I always like to have the teeth on the outside. That way I can count them easily between both sides to make sure I lower the vehicle onto a level jack stand. There we go. So now I've got the jack in the right place. I'm going to go do the same thing on the other side, and then I'll lower the vehicle down. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 teeth high. So I'll then go do that on the other side of the vehicle, and then I'll lower the car down onto these axle stands. One thing I forgot to mention, be wary if you have rotten seams, you will have to find somewhere else to put axle stands. Probably on either side of your shop jack on the subframe. But this is my preferred place to put them if the seam is in a good condition. So let's lower this vehicle down. There we go. I've left the jack in the middle of the vehicle. It has no weight on it, but I just use that to leave it there because I'm only doing a front brake job. So we won't need it anywhere else. There's no point in moving it. And then these are now in the correct location. You are now safe to start working. Right, we are now ready to start replacing the front brakes on this vehicle. Now before you take the wheel off, make sure you have, obviously, your goggles, a good set of earplugs or earmuffs, ear defenders as well, they are also called, because I learned the hard way. You need these earplugs to stop you going deaf if you're using impact equipment. Now, before we take the wheel off, now is a good opportunity to give the wheel system or the suspension a little wiggle, see if you have any loose components. So, at this angle, you can check the wheel bearing. Here is for your tie rods. Down here is for your lower ball joints. And then grab the spring and give the wheel a turn. And what that does is you can feel the vibrations of a wheel bearing through the front springs of a vehicle. So let's get this wheel off, and I'll go and do the other side as well. I am using a 21mm socket as I am working on a Toyota today. Other vehicles may have different sizes. Not all Toyotas will have the same wheel torque, so just be mindful of what equipment that you might need, because different equipment will vary on different models of vehicle. And today I'm using a DeWalt DCF 900 as my main impact wrench today. Let's get these earplugs on. So now that we have the wheel off the vehicle, we need to retract the piston inside. Now there's a couple of varying different techniques that you can use. I'll show you my favorite. You can either use a pry bar. This one's by Snap-on. It has a 45-degree angle, and its part number is right here. MPB S1140A. And if your caliper has a big enough gap here, you can stick it in and push. And that will retract the caliper piston back into its housing. As you can see, the slides here and here are not seized. But I'll show you my favorite method. Now, some people do like to use a screwdriver. The only problem with the screwdriver is that the tip can break off. You're using it for a job that it's not designed. You can also use channel locks as well to push the piston back into the caliper carrier. So let's get this caliper off its mounting bracket. There we go, and now we can see the full condition of our brake pads too. Now these are still moving because I do service these brakes often, and for a brake service I recommend every 2 years at minimum. And what the brake service does is you take off the rust ridges and also lubricate all the pads and the sliders too, and that will help elongate the life of your brakes, because that's one thing that if you're watching this and have a new vehicle, the manufacturer will stick the bare minimum amount of grease, and before long your brakes have prematurely worn out and the dealership will just sell you new brakes. So in order to get a longer life out of your brakes, it's always important, if you've bought a new vehicle, within the first 2,000 kilometers to lubricate the braking system. So that'll be the pins and the pads as well, and underneath the shims, and that way it will extend the life of your brakes. Now let's talk about the other methods of retracting this caliper piston back into the caliper housing. You can either use an inboard brake pad and channel locks to squeeze the piston back in. Some people use a C-clamp, but I find it can be very hard on your wrists, and if you do this for a living, it can actually aggravate your carpal tunnel syndrome. This is my favorite method. They are brake pad retractors, caliper piston retractors, and you can gear. There's a gear in there, and you can push the piston nice and easily back in. Now I find with this tool, what it gives you is a great amount of feel, so you can feel if the piston is binding inside the body of the caliper, or if it is seized and you're not pushing, you're not aggravating your wrists to induce carpal tunnel symptoms. And it gives you a great feel. So if there's the caliper piston sticking or is it excessively stiff, it's time to replace your caliper. And then once you're done, you can flick the switch, and there we go. This one is also made by Snap-on. It does not have a part number on it, but there are other companies that do make the same thing. This one here is my favorite. I've been using this for many years. Now that we have retracted the piston back into this caliper housing, I'm going to take a wire brush, give it a quick clean, get off all the debris that's no longer needed. Quick clean will do. That way and come to reinstall it, everything will go nicely. I'm now going to hang the caliper out of the way whilst we work on the rest of the brakes. Let's get it out of the way. There we go. Now, if you're having trouble removing these pads, you can use, obviously, your small pry bar. Stick it in behind the pad there and give it a little wiggle in the bin. The next step, we want to remove this bracket for reconditioning. Now, as you see, because I service this vehicle often, the brake rotor isn't actually seized to the wheel hub. So there's a couple of different ways you can remove a seized rotor. Some rotors come with these little screw holes here, so you can thread a threaded bolt in and tighten it up and evenly push it off. Or you might have to resort to a hammer to smack the rotor, and that will jar it off. Or you can use a zip gun, air hammer, and peen the area, vibrate all the corrosion loose, and that will also remove the wheel hub, the wheel brake rotor from the wheel hub. Or in the worst case scenarios, which I've seen other people do it, but I never had the need to, and some people have cut the disc from the hat of the rotor off and then get in behind. But I've been doing this for 20 years and I've never needed to do it. So luckily for us, this brake rotor will come off nice and easy. Now, as you can see on this vehicle, there's no heat shield left on this side of the vehicle. It has rotted off. So let's get the worst of it off. Now, a good tool for this is a needle scaler, which I won't, it doesn't look like I need that today. It is completely rotted off. Now, because this, if I was doing a wheel bearing, I'd probably recommend replacing it, but as I'm not, why bother? Otherwise the customer will end up, in some vehicles, it could be, especially up here in Canada, it could be just be more hassle than what it's worth. So let's take a wire brush, scrape off the excess. Now, if this still had a heat shield, once I've cleaned everything up, I would then undercoat it on the inside, and that would protect it from all the corrosion, because they always tend to rot between the brake rotor and the wheel hub. Not on the other side. I usually start from the inside first. So let's remove all this detritus. Remove any old grease. I'm using some brake clean to do that and some shop rags. Let's clean up this wheel hub, ready for a new replacement brake rotor. I'm next going to be using a drill and a 3-inch wire wheel. Be careful of your fingers. If you don't live in a high rust area, you may not have to do this. What I've done right there is just cleaned off any corrosion that could be there, so the brake rotor sits there on there nice and tight. I've also cleaned around the outside to stop the brake rotor, because that's another place where brake rotors seize onto the wheel hub, is around the edge here. So you want to take off any loose and excess corrosion that would be left over from the brake rotor. And that way you'll get your brake rotor, because you don't want any air gaps here, because then you'll do everything up. You'll drive down the road and then your wheel will get all loose. So this is an important step in cleaning your wheel hub. Let's change pieces now. Right, I'm next going to be using a medium coarse roll-lock disc. As you can see, it's got a threaded section right there onto a 1/4 inch, 2-inch adapter. That gives me some flexibility. I'm just going to clean some of the mating surfaces up. There we go. I just picked this drill up as well because my other one, it packed it in after 5-6 years. Next, I'm going to spray some undercoat on here. I use fluid film, rust and corrosion protection. I use this on my wheel mating surfaces as well. Avoid getting it on the threaded sections, otherwise you'll have to recalculate your wheel torque. So for a good example, if you get the silver anti-seize on your wheel studs, you need to make a 25% reduction in your final wheel torque with a torque wrench, otherwise you'll be stretching the bolts. And if there was a heat shield here, I'd spray it on the inside. I'm just going to give it a little lick around here. There we go. We're now ready for a brake rotor. Here is our new brake rotor. I use fully coated brake rotors. There we go. So next time I come to take this rotor off, it will fall off just like that because I've prepared. And when this vehicle comes in for service, when I do the service on it, which will be probably in a year's time or minimum 2 years, if it was a customer vehicle, it will just fall off like that, and that way I can just grind the edges off, stick it back on. Now, to help with reassembly, as you can see, doing this can make life awkward. So I grab a couple of these spring washers, I stick them on, and use a wheel nut. There we go. This will aid reassembly. The brake rotor on there is nice and tight, so no mistakes can happen. And this brake rotor is now on the vehicle. And if you have screw fittings, you can then obviously secure them in. Then you wouldn't need that, but this vehicle doesn't. And then we are now ready for the caliper. Now we have the caliper carrier or mounting bracket, adapter, other different manufacturers call it different things, in the bench vise. It is ready. It's not super hard, it's just pinched in there to stop it from moving so you don't bend it. It's now ready for some service. So you can see plenty of grease from last service. I'm just going to wipe this down. As you can see, the slider is in good condition. Very minimal pitting. This one will just need re-greasing. Now if you have got pitting, you can sand it back, but the pitting will rust again, and it's just better, more ideal, to replace the pin. How's this one looking? This one also looks good. This one is missing the rubber insulator. Now, as it's small, it doesn't matter, but larger ones, I would replace them. One thing to note, that if you still have the rubber vibration insulator on the pin, do not get it in contact with any brake cleaner, because it will cause it to swell and it will get jammed inside the tube of the adapter or mounting bracket, and it will cause premature wear of your brakes, because this pin will not be able to go anywhere. So avoid getting brake cleaner or the incorrect lubricant on the rubber bushing vibration insulator on the slide pin. Now you can take these out for replacement if they are torn. These ones are still in good condition. Now if you have a jammed pin, it will need extraction, and then you can use a wire wheel on a 1/4 inch chuck and you can clean the bore. I will go show you one. Okay, this is the item that I was talking about. It's a wire bore cleaner on a 1/4 inch chuck. You can stick it in a 1/4 inch tool, or if you don't have one of those, you can stick it in your drill, and you can take these out beforehand and then clean the inside with your tool backwards and forwards and some lateral movement, and that will clean the inside of your adapter. Seeing as we don't need that today, I'm just going to pop that over there. I'll reinstall this. Next, once we've dealt with the pins, you can take a small pry bar and get out the old shims. I'm just using a small teeny weeny pry bar from Mac. I'm just going to take those old shims out. Now we can clean where those shims go. I'm going to use my handy old drill again. And I'm going to repeat this step for each of the 4 seats. Use my small pry bar and dig the corners. And then I'm going to repeat that for the other side as well. Once your caliper carrier or adapter has been restored, I like to use CleanFlow Easy Slide. Don't ever put these on the sliders though. I just use it on the shim spots as well as on the pads where the caliper mounts, like touches the brake pads itself. I just do this to help slow down corrosion. Once that is done, we're good to then put in our new metal shims. Make sure these go the correct way as the way that the old ones were removed. If you're having trouble installing them, you can use a small pry bar and just push into the corners to make sure it sits nicely. Make sure that the spring, they have a spring, it's on the correct way and not on the inside, otherwise you can have a problem installing them to the vehicle. I like to use a lubricant, Easy Slide again by CleanFlow. This one is a synthetic dielectric grease, and what it is a silicone based lubricant. There we go. Easy Slide is a silicone based lubricant. And this is what I use on the pad contact surfaces as well as the caliper adapter slide pins. So I take some grease, I just wipe it up and down, then put a splodge on the top, and install. Now if you have air stuck in here, your pin will be pushed out. So I use a small curved pick. I stick it in here just to let some air out as I squeeze. Done. It's now in a neutral position, ready for your new pads. There we go. This caliper bracket has now been restored enough for use to be put back on the vehicle. As you can see, all the shims are in with the easy slide, blue easy slide underneath, and pins are in as well. They move nice and free with their new silicone based lubricant. So we're going to go and mount this back on the vehicle. Alright, now we are ready with our caliper carrier or mounting bracket. It has all been refurbished, ready for service. Let's install it to the wheel bearing housing. I like to thread the adapter bolts in by hand to prevent cross threading. Just to get them started, and then let's nip them up before doing our final torque of these adapter bolts. So I'm just going to quickly nip them up. Now you'll find on some vehicles, especially German, that these bolts are actually one use. They have a initial torque figure and then they have a yield, which is any amount of degrees applied. So you will need new bolts from the dealership. You can find out your torque specifications through Pro Demand, which is Snap-on based, and you can buy a subscription for just your one vehicle. Get a 1 month subscription each and every time. I think it's less than 20 bucks or around that kind of price range per month. I mean, I don't pay for that. I have a commercial subscription because I work on lots of different makes, models and years of vehicles. So the torque on this particular vehicle, which is the Toyota Matrix, for these bolts, 79 foot-pounds of torque. Make sure it's in the on position. Now you don't need a fancy torque wrench like mine. There we go. So having them torqued correctly, if they're too loose, you'll end up losing these bolts and you could have an accident because this will get jammed in your wheel. Or if you over tighten them, you'll actually stretch the bolts. And by doing that, it can also have the same result as well. So this is obviously to prevent a nasty accident from happening. Now we are ready to lubricate these shims, ready for installation of pads. I like to use this easy slide again. I just like to put a dollop on all the shims. Now we are ready to install our pads. Now, please be mindful, not all pads are the same. On this vehicle, luckily, they are, but some inside and outside pads will have a different contact space, especially if you're using OEM. And then some will have a different design. Some will have nubbins in the middle, just for the outside or the inside. Luckily, these ones are the same inside and outside. They do, however, have these spring clips to apply tension, and that's to stop the pads clicking. And they generally go on the bottom. And if you have a squealer, and the squealers are to tell you if your brake pads have worn out and they stick outwards, generally on front brakes, if the mounting bracket is on the front, they'll go at the bottom. If the mounting bracket is on the rear of the wheel bearing housing, then you'll want to apply the squealer at the top of the pad instead of the bottom. So let's get this spring clip in the right orientation. There we go. So both the pads are ready for lubrication. I like to use this again. I like to stick some here, around here. This is to stop it jamming in the bracket. Now it does attract dirt, but it is a water-based lubricant. And then with the spring clip, see if I can get it in here without reducing your field of view. There we go, just like that. Let's do the outside pad. It's always handy to start at an angle. There we go. Now some pads will have little holes here with little spring clips, and what happens is you can fight them because it's always pushing out when you're trying to put the caliper back on. So you can use a little small woodworking clamp and just clamp the pads in whilst you install the caliper. Now that this part is done, we're bringing back out the blue lubrication, and I like to stick some on where the caliper touches the pad, and this is just to help with vibration and also to help prevent corrosion. I'll stick a bunch on the inside surface. So I only use this stuff underneath the shims and on the outside of the brake pads. With that all said and done, we can now reinstall the caliper. Now when reinstalling, make sure there are no twists in the brake hose. So if you twist it and put it back on, you're going to end up separating the inside of the line. You'll get bubbles, and also you could cause a pinch and cause brake fluid to come down, clamp on the brakes, and then the pads, the caliper won't release, and you're driving down the road with one wheel, or however many wheels you've done this to, with the brakes still applied because the fluid can't go back up to the master cylinder. And then you'll end up with seized brakes, hot brakes, warp brake rotors. So make sure your hose is nice and straight. And just slip it back on. You can then reinstall the caliper guide pin bolts. Again, I start these by hand. As you can see with the amount of grease that I use, it is a mucky job. But this way, the brakes, you get the most amount of your money. Now I just like to nip these up. You can, quite often I do these by hand. You get a good feel for them. If you tighten them up and the guide pin is spinning, you can use a small set of locking pliers. Not locking pliers, you can use locking pliers, but I just like to use this kind of pliers with a slip joint, and you can hold the guide pin in place whilst you tighten this bolt. This vehicle, they are 25 foot-pounds. So I'm just going to reset my torque wrench to 25 foot-pounds. And I ended up doing it to 35. That feels good to me. That one is also 36. And there we have it. That's one side of your brakes done. The next step is to remove this, because you don't want to leave this on when you put the wheel on. Remove those spring washers. I take some more undercoat to protect your wheel hub surfaces and to prevent your wheels seizing to this lip. There we go. That's your front pads and rotors done. I'll usually sometimes grab any drips. I'll prep the wheel. I'll clean up the mating surfaces, make sure there's no lumps of rust, and then I'll undercoat that too, and then reinstall. Now we have the wheel installed. Once the vehicle's back on the ground, we can do our final torque on the wheel lug nuts. As you saw, I used a torque limiting stick on my impact gun. This one's an 80 foot-pound limiting stick. So then I will then re-torque the wheel once the vehicle's back on the ground. And that, my friends, is how you change your front pads and rotors on the front of your vehicle. If you like my content, I'd greatly appreciate it if you like, comment and subscribe. All your feedback I will put back into the videos so I can make improvements in the future, and I'd love to hear from you as well. So have yourselves a great day.